Hey, Reed, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
For anyone who doesn't know you, who do you say you are?
Well, the name my parents gave me is Reed, so that's a good place to start. Yeah, my name is Reed Dent, and I am a co-host on the Bema podcast with Marty Solomon, and I also work as a campus minister at a place called Truman State University in Kirksville, Missouri. So those are things that I do with my time. I write, I preach, I disciple college students. I've also got a family. I've been married for 20 years now. I got three boys who are almost 16 and 14 and 11. So family is a big part of our life, and yeah, that's some of who I am. I try to bring, with if people are familiar with the Bema podcast, I don't know how many of your listeners will be, but it's very much known for dealing with context of the Bible, trying to read it in its very Jewish context. Marty, being Jewish, not necessarily raised that way, but raised in a Christian home, and then kind of rediscovering and leaning into his Jewish roots later in life. Like he brings all of that to the text, and there Marty has a lot of that, again, the Jewish sensibility. We've got another co-host named Elle who's got a very, like, really scholarly, she's like an expert in Hebrew, and her name is Elle, and she has a very academic approach, scholarly approach. I would say that, like, so I studied English in college,
Mhm.
and so it was kind of funny because I knew going into being an English major that I didn't want to be a teacher, which is
Mhm.
like that's usually what people want to do.
Right, right.
But I just love to read, and my thought was, well, if I'm going to spend 4 years in college studying something, I might as well let it be something that I enjoy. Having no, and I do not recommend that everybody go this route, right? I
Yeah,
mean, as an engineer, like it is good to, well, this is like cause and effect. Here is the intent for which I do this, and this is going to be the outcome. The process yields the outcome, which is a great way to go about things. And I was a little bit more like, well, I want to do what I like, so I'm going to do that, and I'm just going to see when we get when we get to the end of college, we'll see where it goes.
yeah.
But being an English major, having that degree, like I have more of a literary sensibility, and
Mhm.
I'm really interested in like the Bible discussion is kind of trying to marry it to just our actual concrete like human experiences,
Mhm.
trying to bring the world of theology like down onto the ground that we are walking on, and the jobs that we do and the families that we raise, and things like that. And so yeah, like my my favorite writer uh, taught me that his name is Frederick Buechner. Have you ever
Mhm.
read Frederick Buechner before?
No, I think that's the first time I've heard his name.
First time. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was an incredible writer. Wrote a lot of stuff over a long period of time. Just passed away a few years ago, but he has this thing where he says that the preacher who wants to speak of the invisible presence of God in the world
Mhm.
first needs to speak of the visible absence of God in the world if he wants to be taken seriously when he speaks of what he claims to be the presence.
Mhm.
Meaning, like, in life, we encounter difficult things, we go through hard things, tragedies happen. There's just the mess of living where it often seems that God is absent,
Mhm.
and trying to acknowledge the reality of that experience,
Mhm.
while then also wanting to speak of the presence of God in the world, so that, like, I'm, who I am as somebody that doesn't want to be like a huckster for Christianity or seem like I am trying to sell somebody something or get them to join a club, but rather
Yeah.
point to right, but rather point to the God who is there, like, not up in the clouds, not behind our theology textbooks, but like in the midst of what we are doing and the way that we raise our kids and go to our jobs and do soccer practices and study at college and all of these other various things that God is there. And so yeah, there's a literariness, there's a human experienceness that I try to bring to Bible discussion, Bible study.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so that's a little bit about who I am.
Got you. I like that.
Yeah.
And I think to piggyback on what you were saying with and I guess it goes to what we were talking about earlier, looking at how you maybe come into faith or Christianity, whether it's okay, I believe this because I'm told to believe it. So then I just fall into a worship versus like when you go to college, or even with schooling, there's a need to proving something, like saying, okay, like why is this thing legitimate? Because I guess more recently, or it's always been a thing where it's the someone that's very charismatic, whether it's a salesman or someone that's just like a political figure, they can
Hmm.
sell what is it, ice to an Eskimo,
Sure.
something
Yeah.
to that
Yeah.
extent, where it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, if someone gets you to believe in something right off the bat, you're not really meant to question it. But I think from what you're bringing up, being able to look at what's not there and then point to that as a reason to, I don't know if it's like finding the silver lining, so to speak.
Yeah, I don't know that I would say it's not like simply like a try to look on the bright side kind of thing. Like it
Right.
really is just trying to I think part of real wisdom, and I think you see this in the biblical wisdom literature, is trying to hold two things at once
Mm,
that feel like they are in tension, you know?
right.
And that a lot of uh in my experience growing up, like a lot of the Christian message was only ever God is there, you know,
Mm,
and yes and amen, but also, and this is the tension part, right? Is like what happens when God is nowhere to be found? Like I think about there is the witness of scripture that is like Psalm 139 where David is writing and saying like you hem me in behind and before, and even if I were to go to like the uttermost limits of the sea, even there like your hand would guide me, you know,
mm,
and speak of the inescapable presence of God. And yes, but also like there is Job who like I think we think of Job as the guy who wanted to know why, but I don't actually think that's what Job really wanted. I think if you read the text, like Job, his main complaint is that he just is trying to appeal to God and God is not there. He's like,
mm,
you know, I go this way and he's not there. It's almost like as far as the east is from the west, God is nowhere to be found. And
mm,
so just really trying to hold those two things together and give credibility to it when somebody is like, man, I don't know where God, you know, God is nowhere. Okay, yes, and also this, you know, and really, I
right.
guess that's an example of like a sensibility that is trying to hold things in tension, and not have to always cleanly resolve everything
Yeah.
into a sort of like clear, logical, systematic sort of through line in theology or in Bible or, you know, whatever, because our experience just doesn't work like that.
Right. I,
Yeah.
I guess that's I think that's where maybe nuance comes in, or maybe I've tried to like think with more context, so to speak, like we said, what Bima aims to do and what you guys are looking to do with the book that you're co-authoring as well, is that like on the one hand, it's like it's convenient to tell stories, and I think to say fairy tales, but even fairy tales have layers to them to where it's like there's something going on that engages you enough to be like, okay, this is a story I care about, not just I went to the store, I bought some bread. Because
Yeah.
then it's like, okay, cool, like anyone goes to the store and buys some bread, like so what?
Sure.
But like, okay, if you saw a scene playing out in front of you, or like the cashier was arguing, or there's going to be a fight that broke out, it's like, okay, well, did you get involved? Did you watch? Did you record it? Did you do
Hmm.
this? And it's like, okay, um those things, maybe not the greatest example, but those things don't necessarily anchor to like who you are as a person. But like maybe to the same extent, if you see something happening, or if you have something that takes place and it kind of questions who you are or like where God is, in that sense, you're like, okay, like is it on me to do something about it, or do I just kind of go on about my day?
Mm,
Um, I guess I'm trying to bring it back to how, like, being an English major, having an interest in seeing how literature is written and
mhm.
being able to derive something from that. Like, okay, you read the writings of your favorite author and it's engaging enough to where it's like, okay, I want to be able to recreate that. And then if you take the faith aspect where it's, here's something that I've been practicing or going along with, and I've done it long enough to where I haven't had to question things. But then when harder scenarios come up, like having kids or meeting challenges where it's like, okay, when I'm young, I only have to worry about myself. Now I've got to worry about other people. Now I've got to worry about or consider somebody else's opinion. Otherwise, it's
Yeah.
like if I don't have to consider anybody else, I can just speed down the road full mile. Like I'm not getting pulled over. Like nothing is interfering with what's happening with me. So I don't have to think of anything outside of myself. Does that add any more context?
I mean, so what you're, yeah, those are some good thoughts. I think it makes me think of like if we're talking about, you know, reading and understanding the Bible,
Mhm.
um, what you're saying reminds me of this phenomenon that people have talked about where there are kind of like three worlds to the text. And there is the context that is there is the world behind the text,
Mhm.
which is a lot of what we try to do at Bema, right? It's
Right,
exploring
right.
the world of the author.
Yeah.
And so, what language did they speak? And what did they have for breakfast? And how was their society organized? And what was the government like? And,
Mhm.
all of these kinds of things. And then there is the world of the text, which is like what's actually going on inside of it and trying to discern the kind of a thing it is. And is this like legislative document? Is this some kind of a historical thing? Is this some other kind of tale or song or whatever? And how
Right.
does that work? But then what you're saying is like there is the third world, which I think sometimes we don't actually pay that much attention to, and that is the world before the text, which is the world of the reader. That
Mhm.
you bring something to the text that then necessarily influences what it means to you.
Right.
And so you can read a text at 16 in a Pentecostal church, and
Mhm.
you're bringing a lot with you into the text because
Yep.
of that, because of the church, because of what, yeah, just all these things, right?
Yep.
And then you can read that same text again when you're 40 and you're not in the Pentecostal church anymore. And suddenly, like, it hits you differently. And that doesn't mean that, like, the first one was invalid and this one is more valid or something, but just to be aware of, like, what you always bring something to the text that is
Mhm.
changing the way you experience it. And I think, like, as people, like, it's just natural and it's good to recognize that we are changing things, and
Mhm.
so, like, our understandings can grow and mature and change, even about the same text. And so it's not a matter of, the project of understanding the Bible or about what it means to be human or what it means for God to be God is not simply, well, I learned the right answer when I was
Mhm.
16, in like an engineering kind of way where,
Right.
like, there are math and physics, like there are answers that are fixed and do not change. Well, some of
Yeah.
my like really philosophical math friends might question me on that. But, for the purposes of engineering, like 1 + 1 is 2, right? And you
Mhm.
learn that and that answer does not change. And we kind of sometimes I think of the Bible and God that way. That like 1 + 1 is always 2, as if God, and that is true, but is it a math problem like that?
Right.
Or is the text speaking in a different way? And then like kind of new readings, new meanings, new ways of it intersecting and transforming my life can change along with my times. And so, two things can, again, with wisdom, the tension of like two things can be true. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking about.
Gotcha. That makes sense because I think um, one thing that keeps coming up here recently is like the when it comes from like a leadership perspective, saying like someone is giving you the text and then you're either you're taking it upon yourself to reason with what they're saying, and like you're answering questions for yourself, like you're having to do some of the work, which is like it can feel taxing, or it's like, okay, why should I think if I can just have somebody else think for me? And like if someone's just like giving you all
Hmm.
this like good advice, which is what you guys say in the podcast, where it's like, okay, we're going to present you enough information, but we want you to go out and read it yourself, engage with it, and also discuss with other people, because it's like, okay, even if you're answering a test or you're filling out a questionnaire, it's okay, did I select answer A, B, C, or D? But if a
Right.
different person is coming to it, they like whoever you are reading or whoever you are engaging with it, you're a different person at each age, and whatever you have going on in your life, it's um your life can help inform you of something different, rather than just being like, this is right and this is wrong, or this is why I believe this, and that's it. And
Yeah, where
it
the question is not what is 1 plus 1 on the test. The question is like what is love, or
Mhm.
how does one make meaning out of suffering or things like that, And I think
Right.
the Bible is trying to engage like not just what it is, who it is, what it means for God to be God, which is also like an understanding that grows and evolves over time for us,
Mhm.
but also what it is for a person to be a person. And
Yeah.
these are, yeah, it's not a it's not a math question,
Yeah.
and that what it means for us to know that, even if you can say like what love is, or I could give you sort of a fine response to that. It's important to recognize that like what it means to actually know something is not simply to like have been given the information. Like I could read an essay or a Wikipedia article about the meaning of suffering, and many many books have been written on the subject, right?
Mhm.
And yet like the I think one of the things we talk about in the podcast with like a Jewish sort of mindset is that like you don't know something until you have actually experienced it, until you
Right.
have understood it. I remember reading Thoreau in college, and he said, if you read a book about sailing and you learn how to tie all the knots and run up a mast and all of that stuff, you still don't know anything about sailing. Like the only way to know is to actually get on the boat and feel the rock of the waves and feel the salt spray like in your face, and actually the tension of the rope as you pull it, and all of that. That is what it is to actually know the thing.
Right.
And that's again, that's a maturing, growing, evolving kind of knowledge rather than something static of like, here's the facts. Now you know.
Right. Right. And it's funny because I think in the one sense where we talk about love, or I guess the hard emotions, where it's also judgment isn't a big thing, because that seems to be what people use to either share the word, where it's the you're going to hell if you don't believe this. It's like
Hmm.
it's either A or B. But then love, judgment, discernment, some of these things that you practice, you can have someone that's a bad actor, and say they rip off, they scam people for money, and then next thing you know, they're trying to rebrand themselves, so to speak, and they're like, oh well, I can just go to the church and I can sell them on this method or this thing. And it's like, because they speak well, because they say they mean well, like no one thinks to like check on, okay, like here's what you said you're doing. But then if people actually start to investigate and question you, then you have enough yes people around you that are just like, well, no, 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 just mind your business, just mind your business. And it's like those those two things shouldn't be contradictory. It shouldn't just be like, okay, if someone's a bad actor but they're claiming faith, then it's like the faith is a bad actor too.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Yes.
it's a weird way where you can take something good, misuse it, and then people forget the value of why that person took that thing in the first place. Where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, instead of seeing the value of, um, like we're talking about the context of the faith and what it means to hold two ideas in tension, like what's going on in your present life today versus the people that the text is given to, and
Mm-hmm.
not just reading it as like, okay, hey, this is a math book, this is a science book. It's like, well, somebody's hardcore believing this happened in 6 days, but then scientific research says this, and it's like they're they're two different things. They're not talking about the same thing. Like the language is there, but if you don't have the um if you don't kind of step outside of just this tunnel vision that you have, you're not opening to considering like, okay, here's the truth of what the Bible says, and
Mhm,
then here's the application that it has in the real world with life today.
mhm. Yeah, I think in the case of like what you're bringing up about, this is what the Bible says and this is what science says. It's I think in both of those, or in that case, like we maybe are misunderstanding both the
Mhm.
world of the text and our own world,
Right.
where like we are and we misunderstand our own world in the sense that like it's the water we're swimming in all the time to ask these very scientific questions,
Mhm.
but we don't understand that this is like a set of questions and concerns that like come from the world that we live in, and that those weren't the same ones, and that those aren't the only questions to be asked. They're
Right.
fine questions, and we
Yeah.
can come up with really good answers to, laws of thermodynamics and astrophysics and all this kind of stuff. And that's
Mhm.
all very valid, but that's not the only way of looking at a thing. And so we don't understand our own lens if we think that, like, well, obviously, how else would you think about this unless you were just asking the scientific questions, right?
Right.
And then
Right.
and so then we also misunderstand the world of the text, assuming or making it speak to the questions that I have, when
Mhm.
actually maybe it has a whole different set of questions. And then this is the work of, scholarship and ancient literary studies and all of that kind of stuff that tries to get at the question of, okay, so what were these people talking about? Like what was the world of the text? What were their concerns? And if they used um, you know, if they use words that like I can understand, like stars and moon and sun,
Mhm.
but like that stars, moon, and sun bring up a certain set of concerns that I have. Is that what they were? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so just again, being aware of how those worlds are operating, how they are colliding, sorting through that
Gotcha.
is a part of being a good Bible reader. Yeah.
So I guess how did you how did you get into like becoming a teacher at the college level, like not wanting to necessarily teach? Like how did you transition from majoring in English and then getting into Bible study, Bible education
Yeah.
type?
How much time do you have? Um, we So first of all, just to be clear,
Mhm.
I am not a college teacher.
Right.
So I work at the college, or I work really at a campus ministry that ministers at the college is probably the most
Right. Right.
accurate way to say it. Just to make, in case anybody thinks like, oh, Reed is a professor. Reed is not a professor.
Right. No, no. I meant
Yeah,
just engaging with
yes,
college students
for
where it's
sure.
like,
Yeah,
okay, this is where your background came from, and then
yeah,
engaging with the, I guess,
yeah,
in some
yeah.
sense, I don't know if it's considered like the apex of education where it's okay, you've graduated from your town and then you're put into a different environment from where you grew up. And then this is where your introduction to adulthood, so to speak.
Yeah, so I for me, the way that how I got here is I grew up in church my whole life
Mhm.
and went to a Pentecostal church, and we had a very like visceral, experiential kind of way of doing faith, right? And
Mhm.
we didn't, but I was never really told to read a book other than the Bible by anybody at my church. It
Mhm.
was it was just the Bible, except for my youth pastor did have us read Joshua Harris's "I Kissed Dating Goodbye," which is a relic from another time. But
Mhm.
other than that, like we didn't really engage very critically at an intellectual level with the Bible.
Right.
But I thought I knew that like I wanted to do ministry, even though like going into college, I could see myself doing that. And it's because like at my charismatic church, there was a certain kind of like influence and magnetism that like the preacher had that I
Mhm.
wanted to have too.
Mhm.
I sometimes tell people that like the character that I most related to at that time, if I was being honest, would have been Simon, the sorcerer in Acts, who sees the apostles doing these miracles and he tries to pay them to tell him their secret. Like,
Mhm.
hey, how can I do these things too? I want to do these miraculous things because he's like a magician. And so, of course, he wants some new acts for his or some new tricks for his act, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I felt. Like I want to be a minister because I want to be able to like talk like that to people and like make people feel those things about God.
Mhm.
And then I got to college and had a whole new framework of like looking at Bible because of all of these other, these traditions
Mhm.
that people were coming from. I was suddenly in a campus ministry where I was worshiping alongside people who were Catholic and people who were Methodist and people who were Anabaptist. And somehow all this is the beautiful thing about college students is like they are good at not letting their disagreements destroy the bond between them. And
Mhm.
so we can disagree, but we can still like be chill with each other, and like worship together
Yeah.
because we're all just kind of exploring these ideas as sort of the ethos of college, which I love.
Mhm.
Um, and so my idea of what it would mean to be in ministry shifted, and I think I started to understand better that like it is a matter of service. It is a matter of like doing the way of Jesus, as far as like the greatest among these must be your servant, and that it's a
Mhm.
kind of care, that it's not like just about authority and influence. And that like as the path opened up before me, I mean, I graduated college not thinking that I was going to end up working at this campus ministry. I was ready to go somewhere else and felt one of the rare times in my life where I would say, I think that the Lord spoke to me. And just almost out of nowhere, like this thought started infecting my brain that I couldn't get rid of. That was like, maybe I should stick around this college town for longer, but not having any idea what I would do. There was no job available for me at the campus ministry at that time or anything like that.
Okay.
And yet like felt led to just stay for reasons that I didn't know what. And that was a little bit of a awkward position because, you're getting ready to graduate college, all your family and people who've known you for a long time are like, "So what are you going to do with your life now?" And I was like, "Well, I'm going to live in Kirksville longer." And they're like, "Oh, did you get a job there?" And I was like, "No." And they're like, "What are you going to do?" And I was like, "I don't know." And yet then, that paved the way for when the door opened up to work at the campus ministry. Uh, then I was in a position to be able to take that job. And again,
Mhm.
when I took the job, I had no idea. Am I going to be here for a year? Am I going to be here for 2 years? And now I've been here for 18 years on staff or something. But that my journey with like um, coming to like how I come to see the Bible the way that I see it and teach the way that I teach it at CCF and also through BEMA has really just been kind of like falling down a rabbit hole of I have questions and I start looking into what people say about them and I follow the ones that seem to me both like sound in the sense that like they're trying to make sense of context and text and my world, those three
Mhm.
worlds.
Yeah.
Ideas, readings, interpretations that are following and listening to all of those three worlds, but that also are compelling, like not just that makes sense, but that like I feel the hum, I feel the life in it, like because I think the point of the Bible, we have to get beyond just seeing it as like a curiosity or a subject of study. And
Mhm.
even like Bema listeners can do this where they just become overly obsessed with like this new framework of chiasms and Jewish thinking and rabbinic teaching and midrash and all this stuff. And that's all
Mhm.
really good, but it still remains for them just sort of this like, yeah, this curiosity where I think that the text is like we pour ourselves into it as it pours itself into us, and we actually part of what it means for it to be living is a mysterious thing, but that we encounter God like through the text.
Mhm.
Like that is, we don't just think about God or learn about God, we actually are encountered by God through the text.
Mhm.
And so I'm looking for, my process has been finding writers, thinkers, speakers, theologians, etc., who it's like a web that has been connected of this person to this person to this person, or sometimes even like different threads that feel like they end up overlapping and have a lot in common and feel compelling to me, even if it's not like this one writer led me to this one, but I encountered them separately, but they feel very compatible in a way that is like creating a whole picture for me, you know? And
Gotcha.
it's been sort of like I actually just did a lecture at the college like earlier this week about just like talking about a framework for looking at the Bible, and that like my perspective on the Bible is like an engine that
Mhm.
drives, and like the sermons and the book and the podcast episodes are things that are generated by that engine. They arise out of it, but they're
Mhm.
not the engine itself. And for me, it has been like building an engine while driving the car at the same time. Like I'm figuring out how I read the Bible and what I think about it as I am also, preaching sermons and yeah. So that's kind of a long way of talking about it, but I guess it was I have fallen into it,
Mhm.
discovered myself being grown through it more than I just set out to do it in the first place.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I guess in working with the campus ministry and engaging college students that come from different backgrounds and having different questions, um, do you find yourself having to justify an answer that someone asks you a question about, or like if someone asks you a question and you just don't have the answer off of the top of your head, like do you try to discourage them from asking the question? Because I think I've seen that
Yeah.
at times where it's like trying to follow sometimes, yeah, I've told myself before I don't like drama, but every now and then I find certain rabbit holes of drama and I'm like, okay, maybe if I can hear both sides, or it's like the proverb where someone's case sounds good until the opposition presents something about it. So you may have someone that's an atheist and they're presenting that these are the reasons that they became an atheist, and then
Yeah.
they're pointing to someone that's
Mhm.
a Bible scholar and they're saying that, okay, well, it's just because. And it's like that, instead of saying, like, let me get back to you on this, or maybe you have a point, or you're pointing to something that I can't speak to, like they have to champion their team so much so, or maybe they feel that to where it's like, okay, well, I can't admit that I'm wrong, because then if I give up
Yeah.
ground, then it's a slippery slope where it just keeps backing on up. And then the other person's like, ha, got you. And it's like,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think a short answer is I never discourage the question. I would
mm,
never discourage the question.
mm,
And if I don't know the answer, I have learned how to say I don't know and not feel that as a threat somehow to like my credibility.
right,
Because in fact, if I encounter somebody who always says I know and it's this, then that is actually like that diminishes their credibility in my mind.
right, right.
But I think like the so if we're talking about teams and sides, right?
Mm,
I think actually we feel as so in the example of somebody who's an atheist, which I talk to some like at the
mm,
college. Most of my ministry work, which I'll get to in a second, is actually talking to not atheists, but kids coming from different church upbringings, but who I think still maybe don't always think correctly about some things or don't think the best way about things. And they have bad answers to questions, even if they sound like Christian or Bible ones.
mm,
Um, but like if an atheist comes and says, well, I don't believe in God,
mm,
and already there is where underneath the surface there are two sides forming
yeah,
because there is this assumption and it's like I believe in God, or I don't believe in God and you do.
yeah,
But I want to question those terms from the outset.
mm,
Because when somebody says, I don't believe in God, what I say is, okay, well, tell me about the God you don't believe in. And
mm,
maybe I don't believe in that God either.
mm,
But we hear the word God and we both assume, because everybody uses the word God,
right,
and but we assume that we mean the same thing.
mm,
And in fact, most of the time we mean very different things.
right,
And there's a lot of nuance to like our pictures of God that actually disagree and also maybe do agree. And so, where is it that we have anything in common is what I'm looking for.
mm,
And then let's start like asking more questions rather than I don't believe in God, you do. You make your argument, I'll make my argument. That never works. That never goes anywhere. Like in
Right,
my
right.
experience with people, and or if you listen to like debates online between like an atheist and like a theologian, like all that really serves to do is like further the echo chamber and like further entrench people who agree with one side or the other are just going to walk away feeling like they agree more with that side or the other. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
And so again, like to me, it's like the way we navigate is not by asserting, but by actually asking questions together. And so tell me about the God you don't believe in, and maybe I don't believe in that God either. And like if you want to know about more about the God I believe in, and we can talk about that and we can be in conversation. And then, when it comes to like your question of do I feel that I have to justify an answer? And because sometimes, I run up against college students who come from certain church backgrounds who think that I am dead wrong about
Hmm.
whatever, and that's fine. That's we can disagree.
Yeah.
That doesn't offend me when somebody thinks that I am wrong, but they want to force me into like, or some, not just me, but like they would force justification. And it's like, well, if I disagree with the premise to begin with, then like maybe I'm not going to answer that question. And I think you find Jesus doing this in the Gospels, right? Where
Hmm.
people want to force him into answering a question that is actually like the question itself is off. And so he's going to like renegotiate the conversation. And oftentimes his answer to them is going to be through like a parable. For example, Peter is like, how many times should I, forgive my brother?
Hmm.
And he is assuming one that he is in the right,
Hmm.
and two that there is a limit to like how many times he ought to forgive before he's allowed to not forgive. And Jesus, like I think, just fully disagrees with the premise. And so, but he, rather than answering the question directly, he starts talking about he tells a parable about
Hmm.
an unforgiving servant, and
Hmm.
then he allows Peter to have to wrestle with the implications of like that story for his own life. And I
Hmm.
think that Jesus is looking to not just like give Peter the satisfaction of being right or simply prove to him that he is wrong, but invite him into a thing where like he sees himself, Peter can see himself more fully for like, uh, you know, for who he is, for how he is maybe misunderstanding this thing about forgiveness, and actually have the opportunity to change, because when somebody, I'm getting a little bit of field here, but like in this case, when it comes to like responding to questions and people are like, just give me the answer, tell me what's right, tell me what's wrong.
Hmm.
Um, Sometimes what people need to be told about themselves, it's like the hardest things about ourselves we can't hear if they're told directly.
Hmm.
And so sometimes just answering the question directly doesn't do any good. And that's why
Right.
Jesus tells a parable. And this is like Eugene Peterson wrote a book called Tell It Slant. Like he tells the truth. And actually, this is from an Emily Dickinson poem. Tell the
Hmm.
truth, but tell it slant. Meaning like come in sideways to where you allow the person to arrive at their own discovery of the
Hmm.
truth rather than just saying what it is.
Right.
And so if it's like, do I feel like I have to justify an answer? Sometimes in the act, and I get it, there's like a defensiveness and you want to jump to justification, but then what you're actually doing is robbing the other person of a chance to come to a discovery of truth for themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think it goes back to that Eastern Western perspective of like celebrating what you don't understand for the
Oh
time
yeah,
when you will understand it versus just like, okay, I either pass the test or I fail the test. And
right.
it's that like if everything always happens on a pass fail basis, then it's the overwhelming stress of like, okay, am I fit to be a parent or am I going to get this job right? It's okay. Did I do a good enough job? And always seeking this affirmation externally. Where on the one hand, I guess some people may say that's where faith and religions come in to help people kind of validate themselves. Other people may say like small groups or therapy or different things, but it's trying to solve like internal problems internally versus like seeking external validation, trying to feel some void that's within, but like everything you grab for doesn't fit because it's like we're reaching for the wrong things, like asking the wrong question without just being able to be like, instead of
Yeah.
having a yes no question asked, if you have a story that you can either place yourself in or observe and say, okay, well, this story of having someone being forgiven a smaller debt versus forgiving a bigger debt, if I'm the person being forgiven, I'm more grateful. So if, like, on the other hand, if I'm the person that's being the forgiver, maybe that could help me give someone like the same opportunity I would want to be granted. At
Mhm.
least it's like you get to engage in a story for yourself. Like you get to come to the conclusion yourself instead of just being told, this is exactly what you need to do. And then when
Yeah,
you
for
don't
sure.
do it, it's like, well, okay, I guess I didn't do it. So I've got to start back over. But it's like you said, it's the parable helps provide the answer, but the answers gets to be chosen by Peter that asked the question without
Yeah,
him
I
just
mean,
being told this is it.
I would say it helps him come to meaning and truth, rather than just like answer and fact,
Right.
because there is information, there is, the event, going kind of back to your earlier question about like witnessing something, like there is what happened and then there is what it means.
Hmm.
And that a lot of the biblical text, I think, is actually trying to get us to engage with meaning, what it means. But we are kind of floating around always in the world of like, well, what happened and how do we prove whether that happened or not?
Right.
But it would be silly for Peter, like in response to Jesus's parable about the unforgiving servant, where the servant owes the king at the beginning of the story like 10,000 talents, right?
Hmm.
This is like, I mean, people have done the math, like that subreddit, they did the math, but it's like there are, this is like thousands of lifetimes worth of labor is
Hmm.
what 10,000 talents is if you're just a normal laborer.
Hmm.
And it would be like Peter being like, well, wouldn't, like how, like trying to figure out the economics of like how a king could even let somebody rack up that much debt, which is a good question to ask, figuratively speaking, but to
Right.
be like, what kingdom was this, Jesus? And didn't they go bankrupt, And like, who was their lender and stuff like that? And it's
Right.
like, we're asking the wrong questions because you're living at the level of like, what happened? And
Hmm.
Jesus is like, no, see through this to what it means. And of course, the thing for Peter again, and like challenging his assumption that's in the question to begin with, because his assumption is I'm right, they're wrong,
Yeah.
and like how much do I have to put up with before I can walk away?
Right.
And Jesus tells a story that is actually like, in what I love about this story is that the two servants, the one who owes the 10,000 and the one who owes the 100, they become mirrors of each other in their plea for forgiveness. They both say identically the same phrase. The
Hmm.
one says to the king, have mercy on me and I'll repay you everything. And then the second servant who owes very little to the first says to him, have mercy
Hmm.
on me and I'll repay you everything. And the whole point of this is that that first servant who hates the servant who owes him a little bit and he's choking him out and insisting, the whole point of this is that he is supposed to see, oh, this guy is me.
Hmm.
And so Peter is like, in thinking I am right and he is wrong, Jesus is like, you're thinking about this all wrong to begin with.
Yeah.
You need to see that he is you.
Yeah.
And once you see that, that's going to then, now you've got a new way to think, right? Not just an answer, but a different way of conceptualizing yourself and him and how these two relate to each other. And if you
Right.
have a new way of thinking about it, now maybe this is the thing that's actually going to help you to be forgiving and merciful to him. Yeah,
That makes
and
sense.
now you're at the meaning. Yeah.
Gotcha. And I guess what is what's one thing, or what are two things that you're working on holding tension with right now, like understanding two things that can either be true at the same time, or two things you're trying to navigate.
That is a great question. I think I would say, and this is something we talk about in the book, is the question of when it comes to guilt or criminality,
Mhm.
the question of who is responsible for, like, if I harm you,
Mhm.
who is responsible for that? And there is a simple way of looking at criminality that says, well, I am, because I'm the adult and I made a choice to harm you and
Mhm.
I have to own that. And it's my fault, basically, right?
Yeah.
But if I start to think about the question of why did I do that? And if I don't think of my life as simply a bunch of discrete, compartmentalized, isolated events, but as like a complex web of influence and cause and effect.
Mhm.
And I start going back, okay, well, I did that because this, and I did that because this, and I did that because I believed this, and I did that because I thought that, right?
Mhm.
At some point, you trace the history of my harming or accidentally making a mess of things, or intentionally making a mess of things, but you trace it back, and it's like at some point, you get to a point where it kind of wasn't my fault. Something happened to me.
Mhm.
Somebody or something happened that distorted my perception of what is good and true and beautiful. And that distortion is at play when I do whatever I did to harm you.
Mhm.
And so it's the tension is that it is both my fault and also not my fault. And that, like, and we talk about this in the book through the story of Eve in the garden.
Mhm.
Why? So, we tend to think of that story and what it says about human sin and human nature as like, well, uh, Eve did a bad thing, and now all of us are just like kind of hosed from the start, and we are born like opposed to God, rebellious, in sin, etc.
Mhm.
But if I see it as like a story, th this is a story about humanity and not just about this one person who lived long ago,
Mhm.
and that it's trying to tell me something that's true about me. So we know that, she is made beloved and good, first of all, like
Yeah.
unquestionably, undisputably, unfilteredly, like beloved. And this is what I actually believe about every person, that they are
Mhm.
made in the image, they are made good and beloved. But then things go wrong, of course, and we make a mess. But why is that? And if I look closely at the story, what I see is not the text is not telling me, well, because it was in her nature to
Mhm.
just be rebellious to God.
Right.
But actually, there is this character that enters in the form of the serpent. And, he has this whole conversation with her and she eats the fruit. And then the man and the woman are hiding and God comes and finds them and he says, what have you done?
Mhm.
And I think her answer is extremely telling. And we should pay close attention to it because it's two parts, two phrases,
Mhm.
two clauses that are both like distinct but related.
Yeah.
And the first one is she says, the serpent beguiled me is actually the Robert Alter translation. That's my favorite one. But otherwise translated, the serpent deceived me
Mhm.
and I ate. And herein is the complexity, the tension of culpability that I am trying to get at.
Yeah.
That on the one hand, it's not her fault. She
Right.
was deceived by the serpent. And who among us would stand a chance, against the greatest deceiver of all time? Um, like Ginny Weasley in Harry Potter when she falls under Voldemort's spell and starts letting the basilisk into the castle.
Mhm.
And, her dad's going to get mad at her. And Dumbledore is like, well, way more powerful wizards than Ginny Weasley have been hoodwinked by Lord Voldemort. It's like, well, what chance would we have? And
Mhm.
so it's not her fault that it's not Eve's fault that she was deceived. This
Mhm.
was the snake's intent.
Yeah.
And yet also, and I ate, which was something that she chose to do even in that deception.
Mhm.
And I think, okay, so if I stretch that out and think about it as a framework for thinking about my whole life, like at some point, at various points, I have been deceived.
Mhm.
And then also, like, I have eaten because of that.
Right.
And so, and Paul talks about this in Romans when he says, I find myself doing these things that I know I shouldn't do, and the good things that I want to do, I don't do
Mhm.
because sin has taken him as a captive. Sin is in here's another way of talking about this same tension is that sin is both something that I do, it is an
Mhm.
action, it is me harming you,
Mhm.
And it is also, as Paul writes about, a power that is outside of me, that is like a serpent in a garden that is deceiving me. And it does that through, the various things that happen in my life that are dark and broken and bad. Somebody bullies me, or my parents get divorced when I am young, or somebody tragically dies, or I experience some other kind of just trauma or loneliness or deception or whatever the thing is, right?
Mhm.
And then that influences like, and to me starts to become kind of an explanation for like why I do what I know I shouldn't do and why I'm not doing the good. Well, because I'm deceived. I don't understand.
Mhm.
And so whose fault is it ultimately? Back to our first now, whose fault is it that like Reed harmed Asher?
Mhm.
Well, is it Reed's fault? Yes, but also not entirely. So that's a tension that I am currently living in when it comes to not only myself, but also the people who harm me, and
Mhm.
trying to let this be true of them.
Right.
That like you are, every single one of us, I think, is a complex sort of mix of victim and perpetrator,
Mhm.
and trying to hold that tension for honestly the people that I would, if I had my way, I'd probably rather just write off as like, you're a bad person,
Yeah.
you're a sinner and God's going to get you.
Right.
But no, I think it is actually true that we're all complex mixes of victim and perpetrator. So that's my tension.
Got you. I like that because it's funny because it points to the what do you say, kind of the superhero and villain type archetypes where it's
Mm,
you have the, I guess I've heard it said, the hero looks at the pain that they felt and they don't want the world to feel it. And then on the other hand, the villain has what has happened to them and they seek to multiply that vengeance on everyone, so to
mhm.
speak. But sometimes it's not even considering what created the villain in the first place, like what happened to them in order to make them this. And then
Yep.
someone like the Joker, for instance, I've got Joker and Batman on the brain. It's like the more you look into the character, the more you question or you put yourself in that place. It's that, okay, once you strip away the gadgets, once you, I don't know if you can
Yeah.
strip away the tragedy, but it's like, okay, Batman has this line where he's not willing to kill in most instances. And it's like you have people that are either psychotic, people that are broken, and
Yeah.
they're constantly seeking, I don't know if I'd say vengeance, or they're seeking their end goal, whatever it is. They're trying to rob a bank, they're trying to cause chaos, they're trying to keep things exciting or do something humanitarian. And at the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, I'm trying to stop this person from reaching their goal, potentially harming someone else, and um, keeping the line, so to speak. But all the while, it's like having to deal with what has created you as you, and trying to stop the person before getting into, okay, what made them into them, and like, okay, maybe once we stop them from multiplying the harm, then
Yeah.
we can address, like, let's stop the problem first and then let's try to address that as best as possible down the line.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is why Superman, and forgive me if you like Superman, but like he's so not compelling to me as like a hero because he's just so good,
Right, right.
and also why villains who are just pure villainy are also not compelling. Like I'm thinking about like, Sauron from the Lord of the Rings or something, which,
Yeah.
if people are like deep into Silmarillion and they know like more about Sauron than I do, and he's actually more complex, forgive me.
Hmm.
But the way that he comes across is he's just kind of this purely evil thing, which, but that's not why you come to the Lord of the Rings, is because you're compelled by Sauron, right? You're locked into the journey of like these unlikely heroes and these hobbits trying to like, destroy this evil power, and they're doing it at a cost that's great to themselves. And that's why we get, it's the camaraderie, it's the fellowship, it's the whole thing.
Yeah.
But that like it doesn't, like Sauron doesn't resonate with me as a human being, and neither does Superman. And why is that? And it's because it doesn't speak to the complexity that I know myself to be. But
Right.
this is precisely what I love about, and what I'm kind of in awe of, like scripture as a literary thing. that like these are stories that are thousands of years old, and there is such a level of complexity to the way that they portray people. I mean, think about the way that Jacob is portrayed, or think about the way that David, King David, is portrayed, or think about the way that Peter is portrayed. And they are these complex mix of both like hero and villain, victim and perpetrator.
Yeah.
And it's not and the point of reading these texts in a literary way is not to arrive at some final like sort of declaration on David or on Peter, but in reading about their complications as I am or their complexities as I am engaging the story of Peter and
Mm,
his unflaggable zealousy to remain faithful to Jesus, and then his heartbreaking denial of Jesus,
mm,
and then him frantically, recklessly crashing through the tide when he sees resurrected Jesus, and he still like runs for him with all of his life, even though he has just rejected him. And Jesus pulls him around this charcoal. Here's a fun little literary detail for you.
mm,
In John, the fire that Jesus pulls Peter around is called an anthrakion fire in the Greek. This means it's a charcoal fire, right?
mm,
And the only other time that this word is used in like the New Testament is earlier in John when Peter is standing around the fire. I always imagine it like one of those burn barrels, you know, in the city, and like you got people gathered around, and
mm,
like this girl comes up to him and he denies Jesus, right?
mm,
In front of this girl, and that fire is an anthrakion fire. You know, it's
mm,
a charcoal fire. Why is that detail there? And the answer, I don't know. I don't know. I can't give the final word on why, but here's what I think.
mm.
You know what charcoal smells like, right? Like
Yeah.
there is a distinct smell.
Mm,
And you know how smells have memories contained inside of them to where it is a powerful time traveling tool
mm,
when you'll be somewhere and suddenly, like for me, you know, when I smell hot black asphalt freshly poured in the summertime,
mm,
I am always immediately transported back to my brother and me when we were kids in elementary school and we had our summers off and we would ride our bikes all around town. And at the playground at the elementary school nearby where they had just poured fresh asphalt, and
mm,
just us being in that memory, you know, like I can see it vividly because of that smell.
mm.
I think that here Jesus is pulling Peter back to this moment of his denial so
Yeah.
that he can then reconstitute him and redeem him and say, okay, and now, as we know, three times he denied him, three times he asked, do you love me? Right.
Yeah.
But again, the point is not what is the answer to this. The
Mm,
point is that as I see Peter, I see myself and I find God not just engaging Peter through the
yeah.
text or inside the text, but I find God engaging me through Peter's story. And this
Mm.
is the power of reading it in that way and acknowledging the complexities for what they are.
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And trying to think of a way to put a bow on it, but I think that that's a very good way. And I want to go back now and read that, and also having the literary terms like you described and seeing like, okay, hey, this isn't just a like it is a story that's like sequential, but having different beats in it where it's foreshadowing, and then I forget what the opposite of foreshadowing is, but being able to look back at, oh, this tied into that,
Hmm.
and actually having the story speak to your story. I think that's a very beautiful image to be like, okay, that's what I can get out of it, because otherwise it feels like if the story's not personal, but it's more how would I say, like a if
It's
it's
like an
more like a
engineering manual, right?
yeah, if it's more like Leviticus, or when it just feels like you're just reading something to read it, like you either have to memorize it or you have to just you're trying to digest this thing that just feels like it's not digestible. It's not like I'm not wrapping my head around it to where it's like, okay, well, I I read it, so what am I going to do with it? But actually being able to get to the section where it's, hey, where does this fit into my life? And then also it's not just looking at what fits into your life, but also taking things in broader chunks to where it's not just, okay, well, I just come here to solve my problems and then I ignore everything else. But it's
Totally.
like when you have something specific that happens in life, it will bring you, like, stories like that will be able to speak to you
Yeah.
to what it is you're going through, to where you don't have to just constantly go through the entire thing to where it's like, okay, you ate a well, now you're just uncomfortable. But it's like, instead of eating the well or eating the whole elephant, it's like, let's just focus on this right now. And
Yeah.
I think having that dichotomy starting with Eve and um the encounter that she has and then the confrontation later, I think it really speaks well to being able to address the situation that happened and then why it happened, and being
Yeah.
able to go back and forth and really create that dialogue with what's happening in the story and what's happening with our personal life story is a great way to look at the gospel of becoming human.
Yeah. And I hope that's what people find in our book is is an approach that tries to honor those complexities and the way the text works, tries to
Mhm.
honor that for what it is, and with the sort of posture of like attentiveness and curiosity and looking for wonder, like we approach various stories within the Bible
Mhm.
to ask again, okay, have we come up with some assumptions about what it means to be human and then also what it means for God to be God that are wrong or that are just off because we are not letting those complexities be what they are. And so trying to look again at the text in this kind of a way to discover, yeah, maybe there is something good. There is good news about being a human, that it's not all bad in the way that some of our church upbringings or theologies have maybe taught us, but maybe there is something good that God actually wants to redeem and restore and also partner with to do something good in the world. Like it's not by making us escape our humanity that God is going to somehow cleanse the earth of all unrighteousness or something, but that God is actually wanting to partner with us in the drives, the passions, the loves, the skills, the giftings, all of these very human things about us. He
Mhm.
wants to partner with those to actually help put the world right. And he wants to encounter us in the very human experiences of our lives, not just up in a cloud thinking about theology, but down on the ground thinking about, how am I doing with my coworkers and how am I going to raise my kids? And that is a place where we are, I think, encountered by God and discover what it is to be a human.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Reed, for your time today, and let people know how they can find you and get a copy of the book.
Yeah, you can find me on readdent.com. You can find our podcast, Bema, on anywhere you find podcasts. People can also find me on Instagram at readdent. And then our book is available anywhere you get books. You can order it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can order it through NavPress, our publisher. You can find it anywhere books are sold. So, yeah, thank you for having me on. And it was really good to talk to you. And also, thanks for just helping us get the word out to your audience about our book. And I hope people enjoy it. I hope people are blessed by it.
You're very welcome.